The Holy Gospel according to John. And I'm going to read one additional verse, so I'm going to finish at verse 16. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things come into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, all who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or the will of the flesh or the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. From his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord. Please be seated. Friends, grace and peace to you from God our Creator and from God's beloved Son, Jesus, whose birth we celebrate this morning. So as most of you know, this Advent season, we have been using a quilting theme as our focal point during our worship services. Our sanctuary has looked exceptionally beautiful with all these lovingly handmade quilts. Everybody, we keep getting feedback. Oh, it just looks so beautiful. Can we do this all the time? It's wonderful. And these quilts will soon be blessed and sent around the world through Lutheran World Relief to bring a small bit of comfort, warmth, and love to those in need. Our gospel reading from the first chapter of John this morning fits in wonderfully with our quilting theme. Unlike the familiar nativity story from Luke's gospel that we heard last night, you know, the one with Mary, Joseph, the shepherds, angels, and the baby Jesus lying in a manger, John's gospel this morning is very, very different. It tells the story of the incarnation in a very different way. It's not a narrative story. It's poetry, beautiful poetry, and it's certainly more abstract. In other words, it tells the story more like a quilt. Quilts are made up of many pieces of fabric, some scraps of cloth, each unique, but all sewn together in something very, very beautiful. Something that brings us comfort, warmth, and love. And like the quilt hanging above our altar, each of these squares tells a different part of our Advent story, in our Advent journey, in a beautiful and abstract way. And we talked about several of these different parts of these quilts during several of our Sunday Advent worships. And each one is very abstract, but they all tell a story. Like in the upper right-hand corner, the angel Gabriel comes to tell Mary that she is blessed among women. Or the traditional quilt square called Birds in the Air in the upper left corner, which illustrates that in times when it feels like we're falling, we can remind ourselves that in God's embrace, we are actually flying. The square in the left center has the cross in the center of it, surrounded by individuals shining their own particular piece of God's life and love into the world. The square at the bottom right is full of tulips, and it's called Don't Forget to Laugh. after Ralph Waldo Emerson's famous poem, "The Earth Laughs in Flowers." That square reminds us of the joy of God's creation. And the top center square is titled, "Love Knows Your Name." And it represents the love of God through three abstract triangles folding inward, ready to embrace us. Each quilt square is very abstract, but sewn together, they weave a rich tapestry of God's gifts to us, just like John's gospel does. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In our quilt imagery, this is the sturdy backing fabric, the thing that undergirds everything, the backing that all the other pieces of cloth are sewn to. God, the Word, is the foundation that holds everything together, always and for all time. He was with God in the beginning. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. Just as a quilter sews diverse and discarded scraps of fabric together into something very beautiful, Jesus, the Word made flesh, comes into the world to bring all of creation together. He heals. He loves. He sews and unites our differences and diversities into one. He stitches us back into wholeness, individually and collectively. We are held together by the thread of Christ's love. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Christmas is all about the light of God entering our world, into our lives, and into our communities. The vibrant colors of our quilt shine brightly in the light. And all those vibrant, colorful scraps unite into one beautiful tapestry. I just keep getting distracted by these quilts. I'm looking at them, and they're just beautiful out there. And they're sewn together into one beautiful tapestry, one beautiful creation, all bathed in God's light. The world can seem such a dark and frightening place at times. But John tells us that the darkness cannot overcome the light of God. The vibrant colors of our quilts will soon surround others around the world, bringing God's light to them. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. From His fullness, we have received grace upon grace. Friends, it's God's loving grace that brings the scraps and pieces of our lives together. It's grace that stitches our joys and sorrows together. It's grace that binds our brokenness. It's grace that sews all of us together into the beautiful quilt of God's loving creation. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. People of grace, Christ comes to us this Christmas morning. May the grace and love of God surround you and wrap you tightly this Christmas and throughout your lives. And may God's light and love stitch all of God's children into one beautiful tapestry, one vibrant quilt full of grace and truth. Merry Christmas, my dear friends. Christ has come, and Christ is with us. Amen.